Good morning, good afternoon, good evening, depending on where you're joining us from, and welcome to the Yale SOM online application tips panel. We're joining you live from Evans Hall here in New Haven, Connecticut. My name is Laurel Grodman. I'm Managing Director of Admissions for the full-time program here at Yale SOM. I'm also a proud graduate of Yale SOM class of 2006, so I'm so happy to have the opportunity to join you today and talk a little bit about the school, the program, and of course our application process. So let me give you a little bit of a sense of how the next hour will proceed. I'll kick things off with a brief overview of the program. I'll hand things over to my fellow panelists who are members of our admissions committee, and we'll go into some of the specific components of the application. And then we'll try to leave plenty of time for your questions and answers, and provide you with some answers. My colleague Emily is working behind the scenes. Please use the Q&A function to ask any questions that you might have. We have a lot of people on today. I'm hoping to get to as many questions as possible, but I encourage you to keep your questions as broad as you can so that they're broadly applicable. If you do have individual questions about your candidacy, you can always reach out to us at mba.admissions@yale.edu, and we're happy to engage with you in that way. And so without further ado, the best place to get started in talking about the Yale School of Management is always with mission, because this is a place where mission really does matter. Our mission is and always has been to educate leaders for business and society. That means we aim to develop leaders who can think broadly about the challenges we face in an increasingly complex world, and with the ability to be decision makers in environments that call for multiple stakeholders, influencers, and consequences. And we believe our mission has never been more relevant than it is today. So in service of that mission, we have several features of our program that are truly distinctive to the Yale School of Management. And those are that we are the business school most connected to our home university. We are the most distinctively global US business school, and we're recognized as the best source of elevated leaders for all sectors and regions. So I'll spend the next few minutes talking a little bit more about each of those features of our school. I'll touch upon how they'll benefit you as a student here, and where applicable, I'll talk about how those relate to our application process. And so starting with the first, we are the business school most connected to our home university. As a member of the Yale SOM community, you truly are a member of the broader Yale University community and all of the opportunities and privileges that come with that. And I think one of the most meaningful ways in which this manifests itself is in the second year of your experience here. So your second year is comprised entirely of elective courses, and those courses can be taken in any school, in any quantity, throughout the entire university. And so for instance, if you have an interest in learning Mandarin, you can take language courses at Yale College. If you have an interest in foreign policy, former Secretary of State John Kerry has taught a class at the Jackson Institute for Global Affairs. If you're looking to shore up your presentation skills, one of the most popular classes for SOM students outside of the School of Management is a course in visual storytelling at the world-renowned Yale School of Drama. The majority of our students will take at least one class outside of SOM during their time here, and many will take more than that. About 15% of our students in any given year are actually pursuing joint degrees during their time here, and that can be with the medical school, the law school, the School of Forestry, public health, and so on. And if you're one of those students interested in pursuing a joint degree, that's fantastic. And if you're sitting next to one of those students in the classroom, that's also fantastic, because it means that you're learning alongside someone who's studying a different subject matter area very deeply, and that's only going to add to the richness of the classroom conversation. Now, there's so many ways to engage across the university outside the classroom as well. Our students work on major student-led conferences with students from across the university. They start businesses with faculty members and students from across the university through the Sci Center for Innovative Thinking at Yale. There's myriad speakers that come to campus each year that you have access to. Yale truly is your oyster in that regard. And this is so important because in order to tackle the major challenges we face in business and society today, it's so important to be able to look at problems from different disciplines, different perspectives, different ways of thinking, and recognize when to lead and when to follow, when you're the expert in the room and when you're not. And so thinking about this in the context of the application, we're looking for people who will thrive in that type of environment, who are intellectually curious, who enjoy pulling from an interdisciplinary toolbox in their way to approach problems, both in your history of study and in your professional experience. Moving on to the next distinguishing feature, We are the most global U.S. business school. Now, most business schools these days have some kind of global engagement, global experience, and this will very often take the form of a one-to-one relationship with an international business school. Rather than take this decidedly narrow approach, about 6 years ago, Yale SOM took the lead in establishing what we call the Global Network for Advanced Management, which really cracked open the opportunity for innovation in the global management space. The Global Network is comprised of 30 schools across 6 continents and gives you access to students, faculty, and staff in pretty much every major in business schools in pretty much every major economic market across the world. And because global engagement is so fundamental to our mission of educating leaders for business and society, we were actually the very first school to have a global studies requirement as part of your core experience here. You have a suite of 5 options for fulfilling that global studies requirement, and many of those options are fueled by the global network. I won't go into a ton of detail about each one of these here. They range from travel experiences, through classroom experiences, through experiential learning and consulting opportunities, all the way up through full semester study abroad. In the past year, there were over 55 different opportunities to engage globally here at SOM, and most students will go abroad 2 to 3 times during the time that they are here. As this applies to the application experience, I do want to stress we are not expecting our students to come in having already had global experiences, either in your study or in your professional experience. We realize that people have access to those opportunities or don't have access for a variety of different reasons. It's more the openness to embracing those sorts of experiences that we're looking for. People who have experience with or are open to working cross-culturally, working with people who are different from them. That's more of what we're looking for than actual prior global experience. So moving on to the final distinguishing feature, being recognized as the best source of elevated leaders for all sectors and regions. This in some ways is the feature that I think is most challenging to quantify, but really gets at the core of who we are as a school. So hopefully you're getting a sense already of how important connectedness is to our mission, whether it's being connected across campus, being connected globally. Our unique integrated curriculum is yet another connective force, and one that allows you to look at complex challenges through multiple lenses, multiple disciplines, and again, connect the dots in ways that matter. And so with this in mind, the courses at the heart of our integrated curriculum are called the organizational perspective courses because they look at the way that organizations work from the perspective of different stakeholders. So this could be the executive, the workforce, the innovator, the investor, and so on. In addition, these courses pull from multiple academic disciplines to once again allow you to take a look at challenges from a lot of different perspectives and point of views. So a good example of this is our core course, Sourcing and Managing Funds. This course pulls from operations and strategy and finance and accounting. It's co-taught and once again allows you to look at the subject matter from a lot of different perspectives. All of the organizational perspectives courses are meant to work seamlessly with one another, and this can happen through co-teaching or guest lectures, or looking at a single case through the perspective of from multiple organizational perspectives courses. With that, I'll mention our unique raw case methodology. So many of you may be familiar with traditional business school cases, which give you a set of subject matter, and you're asked to answer a fairly targeted set of questions in a somewhat siloed way. Here at Yale, we also use what we call our raw case methodology. Raw cases are developed in-house here at Yale, and they're big and they're messy, and they involve a lot of different materials from primary and secondary sources, interviews with key stakeholders, media clippings, financial statements, and so on. And you're meant to sift through all of the information and decide what's meaningful, what's not, and answer the questions at hand. It's much more reflective of how you'll encounter challenges in the real world. And so because these cases are so big and complex, you can actually look at the same subject matter through multiple organizational perspectives classes, look at it through different lenses, and see how it all fits together. This approach is definitely more rigorous for both our students and faculty, but I think you'll find it's much more reflective of how you'll encounter challenges in the real world. So once again, from an application standpoint, we're looking for people who will thrive in this sort of environment, who are excited about the idea of pulling from multiple toolkits to answer challenges, and who have experience and interest in doing this as demonstrated through their past academic pursuits and their personal and professional pursuits as well. And so I've focused mostly so far on the academic experience here at Yale, but of course, so much of your experience at SOM takes place outside of the classroom. As an alum of the school and as an administrator, it's been a privilege to be a part of this community, which I consider to be a community of talented, ambitious, and inherently collaborative individuals who are truly excited about learning about one another's interests and passions and different points of views. It's not a place where people tend to cluster with people who walk and talk the same way as they do, and it takes a special sort of person to want to be a part of that type of environment. And I think the best way to get to know our community is to engage with members of it. So we encourage you to schedule a visit and come visit us here on campus, to engage online with our student ambassadors, with our club leaders. You're able to do all of that through our website, and of course be in touch with us here at the admissions office as well. So at this point, I'll transition into talking more specifically about our application process. So you'll see here the various components of our applications as well as our deadlines. So the deadline that's coming up most quickly is our January 7th round 2 deadline. So that's important to keep in mind here. And before our panelists go into the specifics of our application in a little bit more detail, I'll start with perhaps one of the most general questions we get, which is, what does it take to get into Yale SOM? So I'll say there is no one factor of your application that is either going to take you out of contention or guarantee you admission. We really do look at your application holistically and look at all of these components of the application in concert with one another to understand who you are and the story that you have to tell. At a high level, though, to be very transparent, we're really looking for 3 things. We're looking for academic preparedness. It's a rigorous, challenging, and intellectually challenging curriculum here, and we want to set you up for success in that regard. We're looking for evidence of professional impact in your careers to date and your ability to lead and collaborate in the roles that you've been in. And we're looking to bring in engaged community members, people who are going to engage in the community during the time they're here at SOM, but also in the communities that they're a part of thereafter. So we're looking for evidence of that engagement in your prior pursuits. So that's at a high level what we're looking for. I'm going to pass things over to Kate to kick things off with the academic profile.
Great, thanks, Laurel. Hi, everybody. My name is Kate Patello. I'm one of the Associate Directors of Admission here. So as Laurel mentioned, the Admission Committee takes a very holistic approach to reviewing applications. And so one piece of this puzzle is our academic profile. And so when we say academic profile, we're looking at 2 main things. We're looking at your transcripts, and we're looking at your test scores. And these, as Laurel said, really help to gauge your potential for success in a pretty rigorous MBA program. So we look beyond just the traditional GPA. So when we say that we're looking at GPA, we look really heavily into your transcript. So we're going to dive in. We're going to look at kind of your performance over time. We're going to look at each individual course that you took and the grade that you received in that course. We're going to look for some quantitative exposure in there. So it truly is not just the GPA we're looking at. We're really looking at that whole story there. And so I'll start talking about the GMAT and GRE scores by saying test scores are not everything. However, they are a very good marker for success in an MBA program. So when you're looking at, and you're doing your research and you're looking at, GRE and GMAT scores and the medians and averages that schools report, I also encourage you to really look at that middle 80% range, because I think that gives you a much broader idea of who a school is admitting to their program. And I also just want to mention for students that are taking the GMAT, I know that there is an opportunity for you to just submit your highest score and you can kind of hide your prior scores. I encourage you not to do that. I encourage you to submit your full testing profile. And the reason for this is in a prior test, you may have scored higher on the quantitative section of your GMAT. And so having this information when we're reviewing an application really helps us to give this comprehensive review and really see your quantitative preparedness. And so professional experience, similarly to academic profile, is kind of split into two buckets. So we're looking at your resume and we're looking at your letters of recommendation. So the resume will, in a very clear and concise way, tell us about your professional experiences. It'll obviously also talk about maybe your academic history, but then it'll also talk a little bit about any activities or volunteer experiences or interests that you really feel add to your story. And then the letters of recommendation on the other side really help to add color to this. So the letters of recommendation will talk to us in more detail about your performance, as well as the trajectory you've been on at a particular organization, as well as maybe your potential to lead as well. So I'll talk about the resume first, and we'll say the resume, we do offer you a template in our application. You don't have to take advantage of it, but it is a really nice, clear way, and it really outlines, again, your brief academic history, but then also your career progression as well, with very clear start and end dates. And so if you do have a gap in your work experience, I do recommend you talking about that a little in the optional essay, which Jared will talk about in just a minute. Sorry. And then, so for the letters of recommendation, we do require 2 of them. You should choose recommenders who have supervised you or have formally reviewed your performance. If your recommender's first language is not English, that's okay. We're really judging the content that is in the recommendations. We're not focusing on the actual writing ability there, but I will also mention we do offer translation services for recommendations submitted to us in Spanish and Mandarin. And before I pass it over to Jared, just one piece of advice in the recommendation. So I think a lot of students get a little worried that they don't have any control over this piece of their application. And I'll say that there is a bit of control and a little bit of influence that you have here. So aside from just choosing your recommenders, spend some time chatting with them, so if you're in the same city as them, take them out for coffee or lunch. They're doing you a solid by writing this recommendation. Or if you're not in the same city, schedule a phone call with them and really talk to them about, why an MBA, why now, maybe even why Yale specifically. And obviously also remind them of the projects that you worked on with them, the successes and the impacts that you had while working with them. And this will really help them to reflect a little bit more on your experiences, and also may help them to kind of put into context what you've done with where you want to go as well. And so with that, I'll pass it to Jared.
Excellent. Thanks, Kate. My name is Jared Liu, and I have the daily privilege to be associated both with the Yale School of Management as well as be on the full-time admissions team here at the Yale School of Management. So happy to be with you today. So I have the privilege to talk about the essays first. And in fact, I say essays. We only have one essay. So there's one essay question. It's up on your screen here, which is, describe the biggest commitment you have ever made. We developed this prompt in partnership with Amy Wersnewski, who is a professor of organizational behavior here at the Yale School of Management. And in asking this question, the admissions committee is really most interested in how you approach commitment and the behaviors that support that. Why is this important in a business school application? Well, your time in business school and your path thereafter represent significant commitments. So it's valuable for us to understand how you've previously approached a commitment of significant importance to you. The commitment can be personal or professional. It can be specific or expansive. But again, what's most important here is that you talk about how you approached commitment. Even though the optional information section is slightly different, is different than the essay section, I want to spend a moment to talk about optional information. I would say about more than half the candidates will never use the optional information section, which is absolutely appropriate. This is really only if you have something that is an outstanding question. Perhaps there's a perceived gap in your resume. Perhaps you've chosen an unconventional recommender to write a letter for you. These are all things that the admissions committee might want to know and would be helpful to address. It's not intended to be an essay. It's really just more for you to be able to fill those kinds of questions and gaps that the admissions committee might not otherwise know. Great. So the last 2 sections of completing or of submitting your application to the Yale School of Management are the video questions and the behavioral assessment. And I'll let my colleague Jolene talk about the behavioral assessment, but I'll talk about the video questions. So Although you might find this component to be intimidating at first, I really hope that you'll see this as an opportunity to provide a more dynamic profile. Of course, unless you are using a laptop from the 90s like this poor fellow. The video questions were initially developed as a replacement for English language proficiency. We've since found that these are really valuable for us to have all applicants take, but we still no longer require any kind of English language proficiency test like the TOEFL or the IELTS. But these really are not intended to be trick questions. It's also not intended to be a substitute for the interview, which my colleague Jolene will also talk about, and is something that comes after you submit the application. So let me give you a few tips for the video questions. The first is that you will have 3 randomized, previously recorded questions recorded by an admissions committee member. I should say that no 2 applicants will receive the same set of questions. So you will find we've recorded a large bank of questions, and it's intended to be something that should feel fairly fresh to you. Again, none of them are intended to be trick questions, and probably, if anything, they're most similar to what you might experience from a typical interview type of question. The second is on the timing. So on 2 of the questions, you will have 20 seconds to collect your thoughts and then 60 seconds to deliver your response. And then on 1 question, you'll have 30 seconds to gather your thoughts and 90 seconds to deliver your response. I think this is probably the most helpful area to really prepare in advance because 60 to 90 seconds can be an incredibly short amount of time if you haven't prepared your response for that window of response. So really, give some practice beforehand, deliver that response in 60 to 90 seconds, and know that it's absolutely also okay if you finish before that time frame. There's a button on the screen where you can just select that you're done with your response and turn off the camera then to move on to the next question. All right, so a few other tips. Mentioned, be familiar with the response time frame. That will absolutely help you feel most prepared. Second is practice. Certainly there can be some practice that happens before this, but we actually will not allow you to take the video questions, the ones that count, if you will, until you've taken 2 practice questions. So you will have to do this, but this is a way for you to make sure your microphone is working, you have a strong internet connection. But pro tip is you can actually take the practice questions as many times as you would like. So make sure you're feeling absolutely comfortable with how everything is sounding and working before you head into the actual questions. And then the last piece here is find a good internet connection and a private space. Although we won't know the difference, I will say nothing will be more disconcerting to you than if your internet connection is fading in and out, or if everything isn't set up the way that you want. So just make sure you take care of those basics before you go into it. Great, and we'll look forward to receiving your video questions, and I will pass it on to my colleague Jolene.
Great. Hi, I'm Jolene Monson, and I am the Deputy Director of Admissions here at Yale SOM. And I'll be talking today first about the behavioral assessment. So at SOM, we are looking throughout the application for people who are broadly minded, who are intellectually curious, and we want to develop a class that represent a diversity of backgrounds and interests. So with this goal in mind, we've rolled out a new component of the application, which is the behavioral assessment. So for the behavioral assessment, it's an online tool that was developed by ETS, or that we collaborated on with ETS. ETS is a group that developed both the GRE and the TOEFL. We call it a behavioral assessment. It's a piece of the application that provides additional kind of information about who will perform effectively in the Yale SOM classroom. With this additional data point, the tool can sometimes be used to provide the committee with some confidence to lean in on candidates who maybe don't have the strongest academic history for whatever reason, but who nonetheless have what it takes to succeed in the classroom and who will definitely make a significant contribution to our community. So the assessment itself becomes available after you click submit and pay the application fee. It's just like the video questions that way. It'll take you about 20 minutes to complete. The idea of the behavioral assessment is to lift people up and not take people down, really. So it can only help your application to do well here. So after your application is complete, you'll submit, you'll pay your application fee, complete the behavioral questions and the video questions. Then your application goes into review. The next step into our review process is that we invite people for interviews. So our interviews are by invitation only. We start sending out those invitations on a rolling basis really pretty soon after the application deadline. There's no rhyme or reason about when you get your invite, so don't worry if it takes us a little bit of time to get to your file. It's really a bit randomized how quickly we get to your file and how quickly you can get your invite. If you receive an invitation, we'll offer you a spot to interview here on campus. If that's not possible, we also interview on some hub cities throughout the world in rounds 1 and 2, and we do virtual interviews throughout all 3 rounds here at Yale SOM. Interviews are 30 minutes, and they are what we call blind interviews. So that means that the person interviewing you will not have read your application cover to cover. The person interviewing you will only see your resume, so they might ask for clarification on things that you explained in other parts of your application. So kind of have a feeling for the structure of the interview as you go in. If you interview on campus, your interviewer will most likely be a second-year student who has volunteered and applied to be a member of the interviewer team. If your interview is off campus at one of our hub cities, it will be one of the admissions officers like myself or one of my colleagues here. And if your interview is in a hub city, most likely your interviewer also wouldn't have read your file. So it's a very similar experience whether you're interviewing with a member of the admissions committee or with a second-year student. If you interview virtually, it's really kind of up to the time and date of your interview, whether it's with a student or admissions officer. There's really no way to predict what will happen in that situation. When you go into your interview, though, do remember kind of just the basics of general interviewing. Treat it a little bit like a job interview. So you want to be on time, you want to dress professionally, and really come prepared for the interview. Know a little bit about Yale SOM. Think about a few questions that you might want to ask. Have a clear idea about why you want to take this next step in your career. And at the end of the interview, like all general interviews, you will have some time to ask questions to your interviewer. So really have some questions prepared to ask. After the interview, we would certainly enjoy a quick follow-up note, a thank you to the interviewer. We want to be a resource for you, so don't hesitate at any time during the process to follow up with more questions or information for us. The interview in itself lasts 30 minutes. If you come on campus, there'll be a variety of other activities that you can take part in for most of the days that we have available to interview. And it is the final step in your application. So everybody that we consider as interviewed or that we consider for final admission goes through an interview. And with that, I want to pass it to my colleague, Valerie, for the financial aid.
Wonderful. So last but not least, we will be going into scholarships and financial aid, which is always a hot topic. So obviously this is another big piece of the preparation process, preparing for financing your MBA. So obviously we understand that pursuing your MBA is a huge investment in both your time and your money. But we also know that the return of investment is pretty significant. So to start off, I just wanted to congratulate all of you for taking that first step in listening to this panel, as it's definitely a good way to start preparing. So I wanted to let you know there are things that you can do preemptively to start kind of thinking about different ways to finance your MBAs. So the first being outside scholarships. So the first thing that we usually do when chatting to students, to prospective students, is to look online and do research on companies and organizations that provide support to students who are looking to work in the MBA field. We actually have a pretty great resource on our website, on the financial aid site, that has a long list of different outside scholarships that students have made us aware of, that alums have made us aware of, with hyperlinks on where to apply. And as working in the financial aid office and knowing what we process, we do get awards for $10,000, $20,000. So this is kind of research that you can start now and is definitely a viable way to help finance those educational expenses that may come up. So definitely something to look into. Another note to take is that many employers do now offer sponsorship. So setting up some time to chat with your employer and seeing what those options are and if they're available to you is definitely something that you can start now, especially with students who are in professional companies. It's definitely something that we do see, and we have a great chunk of students who do take advantage of this, who either receive partial sponsorship or full sponsorship for tuition and fees. So another viable way to help finance that MBA. Now, going into our veteran students, they do kind of have a different process. One thing to note is that we are recognized as a GMAC-friendly school, meaning that we waive all application fees for our military applicants. And additionally, veteran students who are eligible for Yellow Ribbon funding receive full coverage of their tuition and fees, meaning that if you qualify for this, you will end up paying zero towards SOM. So that would be for students who are at 100% eligibility, who are not considered active duty, and who are Yellow Ribbon funding eligible, which is a pretty great deal. And we are actually one of the first private MBA institutions to offer this to our students, which we're incredibly excited about. We work very closely with our veteran students, so always feel free to come to us to kind of help demystify this process for you. Now, while you're actually enrolled in SOM and you're thinking about applying to SOM, just to give you an idea of the type of aid that we award, it is on a merit-based basis. And so your application for admission is also your application for merit-based aid. So no additional essays are required for that component. And if you happen to be eligible for a scholarship, you would receive notification of that along with your admissions letter. So it's kind of like a one-stop shop. Awards can range from $10,000 to full tuition, and it really depends on the strength of your application and the strength of you as an applicant. I also wanted to dive into just some of the really great fellowships that we have in place, one of them being the Entrepreneurship Fellowship. And so this is really offered to students who want to develop their ideas using Yale resources so that they can funnel more time and money into their startups during those critical few years. And so what we would do at SOM is actually defer student loan payments for 2 years for up to $7,000. And this would just really help you focus on those entrepreneurial ideas without having to have that loan debt at your back. So definitely something that we see a lot of students take advantage of, and currently we're offering 5 fellowships each year for students who are applying to this program. Now, post-SOM, one of the most exciting, I believe, programs that we offer is the Loan Forgiveness Program. And so it's actually a pretty robust loan forgiveness program. We modeled it after Yale Law School's loan forgiveness program. And since 1986, we've spent somewhere up to the tune of $9 million. This past year alone, we spent $1 million, and this is really meant to encourage students pursuing nonprofit fields to go into those fields while helping alleviate their loan debt. And so if you qualify and you have an eligible employer, you can receive support for up to 10 years. So for many students, the relationship doesn't end as soon as you're admitted or as soon as you graduate. For some students, you'll be chatting with folks in the financial aid office for about 14 years. So we get pretty cozy and familiar with all of you. And so that's just to give you a taste of some of the resources that are available for you. We're always here to work with students to help demystify the financial aid process, to help you understand loans, how they work, and help you maximize to make sure that you're getting the most attractive interest rates. Many of our students qualify for very attractive interest rates. So if you ever have any questions or concerns, both myself and my boss, Rebecca Melville, who's the Managing Director of Financial Aid and Admissions, are always happy to answer any questions you may have. So always feel free to reach out.
Great. Thanks so much to the whole team for providing that perspective so far. So now we're going to turn our attention to your questions. Thanks so much for all the questions that have come through so far. I've been ferociously organizing them here into some buckets, so we'll probably stick with one theme for a bit before moving on. I will say if you're going to put questions through from this point forward, please use the chat feature. I think I gave you bad advice before. We have been collecting the questions from the Q&A feature. It's a little bit easier to use chat, so please move to that. I'm going to try to focus on the questions that pertain to the application process as best as I can. We've had a number of good questions coming through around the curriculum, the community, and so on. I'm going to try to focus most on application-related questions, but there's a lot of other resources and recorded panels online as well that hopefully touch upon a lot of the non-application questions. I'm also going to mention two other resources for tips as you're putting together your application. We do have video tips embedded within the various sections of the application. So once you go in and open up a Yale SOM application and navigate through the various pages, you'll see kind of in-context tips within those sections as well, which can be helpful. We also have an online application guide that we launched this past summer, which again will give some more texture to the individual components of the application. So I encourage you to check all of those out. So I'll kick things off. We'll move back to academics to start. I have a couple questions in that area, and I'll start with Kate here. So one question is, if you have a master's degree and an undergraduate degree, which does the admissions committee weigh more heavily?
Oh, that's a great question. And we'll look at both. So we certainly want to see kind of your entire academic picture. So when I say transcripts, I didn't necessarily just mean undergraduate transcripts. I certainly also include any graduate degrees that you have as well. So we'll look at those as well, pretty much kind of in conjunction with an extension on your undergraduate experience.
Great. And maybe as an extension of how we're looking at that academic information, another question around how much does your testing and GPA matter compared to job experience and extracurricular activities, and by extension, other parts of your application?
Yeah, and I think this is a question we get a lot, and I think Laurel touched on it a little bit as well when we were talking about the things that we look at in an application, and certainly your academic preparedness is a huge part because, as Laurel said, it is a rigorous program, and we want to make sure that you're going to be successful on the academic side as well. But obviously, work experience is also very important because we also want to make sure that you're going to come here and be successful post-graduation as well. So I'll go back to what I said earlier and say that it is a very holistic process, and each piece of your application is certainly very important. We, like I said, want to see the academics, we want to see the work, and we want to see who you are as well, and these are all extremely important to us.
Great, and maybe building off of that some more. What if, particularly academically, one aspect of your application is not as strong, and you're aware of that? So it could be a lower GMAT score, or perhaps the quantitative score within your GMAT or GRE. Is this cause for concern? What can you do to make up for that discrepancy?
Yeah, another great question. And so I would say that if there's a particular thing that you're worried about in the application, certainly, own up to it. So there's certainly things that you can do to kind of help us to understand that you recognize this, but you're also ready to kind of make amends for it. So maybe if you're worried about a particular your academic history, specifically in the transcript side, if you're worried about your GPA, maybe take a class, maybe specifically in a quantitative area, so maybe a statistics course or a microeconomics course, or maybe just take, HBX Core or one of those kind of more overview courses. That's certainly a way to kind of demonstrate that you're ready for an academic program. So there are certainly things that you can do to help kind of us feel better about the whole application.
Great. The number of professional-oriented questions, I may spread these out a little bit more because I'm going to come back to you, Kate, for some Silver Scholar questions as well. So maybe Jared, to move on down the line. I have a number of questions here about kind of interesting or complicated professional circumstances. So maybe your company is in the middle of restructuring and your role's being eliminated, or you're in the midst of a professional transition, headed into a new job where maybe you haven't started yet or you just started. What's the best way to address kind of transitional elements of your professional experience?
Sure, and thanks for asking this question. I will say there are many things that are exciting about being in the role that we're in. One is that we see very few people who work at one company for the rest of their lives, or are in something that's very siloed. So many folks have a similar narrative like this. So don't feel that you're alone. Many people have transitions and not recommenders, bosses or folks they report to who they've only just recently started working with. So there's a lot of fluidity. It's really exciting to see. So I would say, certainly any of this can default to the optional information section. If you feel there's something that just will not come across in your resume or in the transition statements or in your goal statement, won't come across anywhere else in your application, definitely let the admissions committee know through the optional information section. I should underscore too that the optional information section is not intended to be a full-on essay. It can be bullets, it can be one paragraph, it could be one sentence, but something that you just think the committee may not fully understand, this would be a great place to let them know. Kate did talk a little bit about how you should definitely talk with your recommenders heading into them writing the letters. If this is something that you think a recommender could underscore the same point as well, that there's been some transition and you're showing that in your resume, and the recommender could also address that, definitely tee that up with them. Let them know that that's something that may reflect really positively for you, and you would love if they could address that.
Great. And another less common, but definitely not uncommon circumstance, tips for people who are working in their family business. So perhaps being concerned that you don't have an obvious choice for a letter of recommendation, particularly if it's a smaller organization and you're working directly for a relative. Concern that maybe your position seems elevated for the wrong reasons when in fact you have worked hard to get it. So thinking about that particular set of circumstances around a family business.
For sure. And we will see a number of applicants who work for a family business, whether it's their own family business or just as a family company and it's privately held. It's increasingly common, or I think it's maybe more common than a lot of folks realize. So you are also in fairly similar shoes to other folks. As Laurel mentioned, for example, if your relative is the person who you report to, that is a great place to depart from asking that person who supervises you to write a recommendation. We allow you a lot of flexibility in who you ask write a recommendation for you, but definitely think through what might appear to be a conflict of interest. And so if you are the CEO of your company, if you report to a relative, if there is no one who really supervises you, a great recommendation to go to is a client. A client is essentially someone who you report to, holds you to a high standard, and can write a great letter of recommendation for you. So that's definitely somewhere I'd turn towards. Many people have professional mentors. That could be someone who could write a letter. And maybe you have a board of directors. Could also be a good place to start. So you should definitely have some options. If you really feel like you don't, reach out to mba.admissions@yale.edu, the address that's on your screen, and feel free to ask us. But I think in many cases you'll find that there is someone who essentially you report to, if not officially on paper, who in your role, professional capacity, really that is their relationship.
Great, and on the theme of letters of recommendation, Jolene, I'm going to target a few of these questions towards you. In addition to family business applicants, we also have entrepreneurs who apply to our program, and the question of letters of recommendation for that group comes up as well. So for an entrepreneur who can't get a letter of recommendation from a supervisor or manager, what's a good way to go for those?
Yeah, so I would maybe use the perspective of trying to find somebody that you answer to in any sort of way. It could be a client, or again, a board of directors, or an investor, or any sort of kind of person like that you're answering your performance to in some way. Those are all really great choices. Often we see for entrepreneurs that clients make really great letters of recommendation. Every once in a while we see an entrepreneur application with a board of director or a business partner who can write a letter of recommendation for you. And generally, we're not looking for colleagues to write letters of recommendation. So if you do choose a business partner, we'd want to understand what exactly your relationship is really, really carefully to understand what the context of that relationship is. But most of our entrepreneurs do use clients or board of director sort of recommenders.
Great. Another question related to letters or recommendations. So if you have friends or mentors or connections who are alums of SOM, is it helpful to have them write an informal letter on your behalf, in addition to the two that are required?
Yeah, so it might be helpful, it might not, but but you do have the option to add that to your file, basically. So if you do have an alum that you've worked with in the past who's not your official recommender, but you would still like to kind of make us aware of that relationship, the alum is really welcome to kind of send a letter directly to us via the email that you see on the screen, and we will add that letter or that word of advice to your file. On our alumni portal that all of our alumni have access to, there is also a link there for alumni to post official referrals for people that they know. So reminding them that that might be an option is good. And you know, it never hurts to see those letters from alums or from other contacts. But again, it really kind of depends on what kind of information is there about whether it really helps in any way. We usually read those letters and look for the same data that we're looking for in the recommendations, in the resume, and in the academic history.
Great, thank you for that. So as promised, I'm going to pitch things back over to Kate for Silver Scholar questions. So Silver Scholars is our program for students who are just completing their undergraduate degree and going direct into the classroom here, spend a year in the classroom, a year or more, gaining professional experience through an extended internship or experience like that, and then coming back to the classroom for your final year. So by the nature of the Silver Scholar population, you're not going to have full-time work experience. And so the question there is, how are we looking at professional impact for that population?
Yeah, and that's a great question, and one we get a lot from our Silver Scholars is how are we actually reviewing them as an applicant. And I'll actually say in some ways it's not that different because most of our Silver Scholars have pretty significant internship experience that they're sending our way. So we're certainly looking at that when we're reviewing our Silver Scholar applicants. I'll also say very similarly to the MBA population, the general MBA population, obviously your academics are super important as well, especially since you're currently in them and you don't have professional work experience to kind of carry you through. We're going to be really heavily looking at your academic performance as well. And so when you're applying to the Silver Scholars program, the one big difference in the application is that one of your recommenders will be someone kind of from your professional experience or your internship experience. And then the other recommender, we actually ask for something coming from your academic experience. So whether that's a faculty member most often, or maybe somebody you've worked with very closely throughout your undergraduate degree. So that way we can really see both sides of this.
Jared, a question about the essay. So we've all probably read thousands of essays at this point. What makes the best essays? What stands out for you?
Sure, and I love reading the essay, so thank you for this. And I think it's hard to give a response that won't sound canned, but honestly, be genuine. And we try to be transparent. Hopefully, this has come across in the panel today. But really, what the admissions committee is looking for is how you approach commitment. I think it's easy to get hung up on what was the biggest, right? So we're not saying, well, this person's having a child trumps that person's get a promotion, or whatever example you might say. It's really a way for you to make sure you pick something that's significant to you. But what the committee is really interested in is not in sort of settling scores of whether that was a big commitment or not, and more to understand how you make a commitment. So it can range quite a bit. Again, it can be personal or professional. I would recommend that if you pick something that is fairly expansive, make sure that it not read like a resume. I think you won't tell us enough about how you approach the commitment if it comes across as being bulleted lists. But really, it can range the gamut, and it's a really enjoyable way for us to get to know a little bit more about who you are and the kinds of things that you value and how you make those decisions.
Great. We had a couple questions too about reapplicants, and Jared, I'm going to direct this your way as well because some of them are more essay related. So we do have a reapplicant essay, and so what is the admissions committee looking for in that essay? And then as a kind of addendum to that, given that one's commitment particularly one's biggest commitment might not have changed from year to year, how do you suggest approaching the main essay as well?
Great. So we love reapplicants. As you may know, we actually are one of the few schools that allows candidates at the end of the cycle, if they have not been admitted, to ask for feedback. And I think this is something where we see our reapplicants really will seek that feedback. There is something that's very mission-driven about why they have chosen to apply to the Yale School of Management, and this is really their primary focus. And so they are coming back to apply the next year. They ask for that feedback. And so, to your question about what do we look for in the reapplicant essay, it typically will go back to those things of what has changed, and if you sought feedback, definitely address what you did to sort of meet the feedback that was given to you. But in general, the committee is looking to see what has changed since your last application. A number of things could have changed. You could have retaken the test. You could have gotten a promotion. You may have changed jobs. You may have relocated. Personally, you could be serving on the board of directors or volunteering in a different organization. So lots of things can really change in a year, or it could be multiple years since you apply again. So we're looking to know what those things are, and will help us to identify, why this is still really a relevant and timely thing for you to apply for. But like I said, we love reapplicants, so thank you for continued interest in Yale School of Management.
Great. And on the theme of reapplicants, how would you approach using same or different letters of recommendation?
Yes, and I probably didn't give a full enough response to your essay as well. So if your commitment hasn't changed, you can leave that essay the way it is. It should be a fairly streamlined reapplicant process. You can even use the same 2 letters of recommendation from the previous year. So when you go into your application process, you will see that you have the ability, those same 2 names are there, and you can re-import them if you would like those to be. You obviously won't be able to see the letters of recommendation, but you'll see their names, and you can choose to use those same 2 folks, or you may choose to change it up if you'd like as well.
Great. And as Jared emphasized, it's really important to be thoughtful in the time between your first application and your subsequent application and think about what changed. And sometimes updating that essay and updating those letters of recommendation may make sense. I didn't mean to imply your commitment should not have changed, but the amount of time that's passed may be a time for reflection, may have just brought new ideas to light. So all of those things are on the table. It's really, I think, quite an individual choice whether you decide that those are areas that you want to focus on updating. Jolene, I'll pass this interview question over to you. Do you recommend an on-campus interview over a hub city interview? Would an on-campus interview lend to you're leaving a more positive impression versus doing that off-campus?
I think we definitely prefer an in-person interview over a Skype interview, although we do have an understanding that, life is complicated. So if you are living far from a hub city and can't afford to travel to New Haven, we don't really expect you to make that investment already, just to have an interview. But if you can make it to New Haven or to a hub city to interview in person, that's generally preferable to a Skype interview. Whether it is a hub city or on campus isn't going to affect your application. We do have some additional kind of opportunities to get to know the class and the community if you're able to come on campus, which is really great, but it's not necessarily required.
Great, thank you. Valerie, if you're awarded a merit-based scholarship, when would you be notified of this in relation to being notified about your acceptance?
So you would be notified at the exact same time. So when you receive your admissions letter, you would also hopefully receive the good news about your scholarship decision. So all in a one-stop shop.
Great, thank you.
Of course.
Kate, I have a question about MBA career interests. The question is, how explicit and clear must one be in answering the brief question we have about MBA career interests? Specifically thinking about the part of it where we asked you to how you will position yourself to achieve those interests.
Yeah, I think this is a good question because I think that there's two sides of the coin, right? So you should have done quite a bit of reflection as to why you want an MBA, and part of that reflection is, what do you want to do after you graduate with your MBA, and how is the MBA going to get you to that next step? But then there's also the thought of the MBA is a really great time to explore a lot of options that you may not have been aware of, and you're going to be exposed to a lot of students that are coming from various different areas. So I think a lot of students struggle with that. They want to use the MBA to, open doors, but they also, they want to know how explicit they should be. So there should be quite a bit of reflection that you've done before you come to an MBA, before you apply for your MBA. So in that career section, you should really talk about what you think you'd like to do, and be pretty, like I said, explicit in how the MBA is going to get you there. But then know that on the back end, once you are here in the program, nobody is going to follow you around and make sure that you're actually doing that one thing that you said, because we are aware that doors will open for you. But I think at the time of application, you should be really ready to talk about how the MBA is going to get you from where you are to where you want to be.
Great. Jolene, can you dive into the behavioral assessment a little bit more? Maybe talk specifically about the format and what you can expect once you click that button and start your behavioral assessment.
Sure. So it's a series of, I think, 120 questions that you answer not too quickly, but rather quickly. And most of them are choose between two words and kind of choosing the one that speaks more to you. So it might be table or chair. It won't be that, but it will be two words that you have to choose from, and it will kind of spiral a little bit on a few words as it tries to kind of figure out, as it tries to assess the behaviors that it's looking for. So it is pretty kind of upfront. There's no studying or anything to go from there. It's pretty, just there.
Yeah, it's interesting. We've been getting feedback from, and we've had in various ways the last 3 application cycles. We've had people taking the behavioral assessment, and and we've all taken it ourselves. It's fun to get the feedback. You'll be given these 2 statements, and sometimes neither of them feel like a great match, or sometimes they'll both describe what seem like negative traits that maybe we don't want to fess up to in ourselves. Don't get too hung up on any one pair of statements. It is adaptive. It's 120 questions. No one pair is going to be determinative of the outcome, and everyone's individual experience will look a little bit different because, as Jolene mentioned, it may cycle through similar sounding statements a bunch of times because it's trying to home in on something specific for you. It's not meant to be stress inducing. I think it's sort of fun to take. And our longer term goal is to be able to share the results of it with you as a student once you join us here at SOM. We're still working on that, but that would obviously help it come full cycle and allow you to learn something about yourself in the process. But we'll hopefully get there soon. We're coming up on time. I think we probably have time for 1 or 2 more questions. Jared, how does Yale value military experience in comparison to other types of full-time experience?
Sure. As my colleague Valerie stated, we're honored to be a vet-friendly school. We have taken a number of steps to really show that that's an important commitment to us. So thank you for your service. And this is across the world. U.S. military, certainly a large population here, but we see a number of folks who apply to Yale SOM who have served in the military of many different countries. I will say I'm always humbled when I read an application from someone who has served in the military by the level of leadership experience that they've been able to attain. It really, I would say there's not a comparison of, military to, another industry from, one applicant to the next. So you're really evaluated against yourself in many facets of, the application. So, I would say on the surface, we look at it much the same as we look at anything else, which is what have you done with what you've been given? Military is one that's, certainly of interest to us. It's, an access group that we have tracked very closely and adds a lot of leadership components for sure. But like I said, on the surface, you are evaluated against yourself.
Great. I'm going to assign myself this last question because I've been thinking about it throughout the panel now, and it's a really good one. The question is, how long does it take to complete the entire application process at Yale SOM, and how much time should you plan to prepare? And I sort of was noodling over this one because, in some sense, our application itself is very streamlined. We're really only asking you the questions that we are going to use evaluatively within our process. We've tried to trim a lot of the fat in that respect. However, thinking about your application to business school at large is obviously a very introspective and time-consuming process. So I think, I've heard sort of anecdotally about a year is the amount of time between deciding that you might be interested in going to business school and kind of completing that application process. Presumably, many of you have undergone an extensive part of that experience so far. And some of you may be earlier in the application process and not necessarily teeing up an application for this next round. But I think assuming that you have done the introspection already and really thought about why this makes sense for you, how you're going to take advantage of it, lined up your letters of recommendation and taken your GMAT, and once all of that is ready, I actually don't think completing our application is all that time consuming. The essay is, my guess, probably the most separately time consuming piece of it. The video questions and the behavioral assessment go like that. It's not something that you have to prepare for in advance. So I hope you'll find the experience of actually applying to be quite streamlined once you've done kind of the mental work of getting there and knowing that this is the right next step for you. So with that, I'm going to conclude our application tips panel for today. I hope you'll continue the conversation with us and with members of our community through reaching out to us at mba.admissions@yale.edu and to our student ambassadors and club leaders whose contact information you could find online. And we're looking forward to hopefully reading many of your applications starting on January 7th in the new year. Thanks so much for joining us today.